Welcome to Epilogue, the only show that cuts into the big issues behind the best books on politics and world affairs. I'm Derek Conway, and this week we're reviewing The 11th Day, The Ultimate Account of 9/11 by Anthony Summers and Robbyn Swan. In this epilogue, we'll review the book and the issues around it, but before I tell you more and introduce our special guest today, let's take a look at our introductory video.
The 11th Day is the new definitive timeline for 9/11. The largest terrorist attack the world has ever seen. A historical event that shaped the first decade of the 21st century, making the world a less safe place. The war on terror followed. Afghanistan and Iraq have suffered a full retaliation from the United States, even though they were not involved in the attacks, and the mastermind of the attack, Osama bin Laden, was of Saudi origin. But what exactly happened on that day 10 years ago? Beginning with the first brutal actions of the hijackers aboard American airline Flight 11. The 11th Day tracks the precise sequence of events and introduces the players, pilots, terrorists, the airline passengers, and the innocents who died on the ground. Drawing on classified records and raw transcripts, the authors investigate the response of President Bush and the US military that day, and the failure to intercept the hijackers' airlines. With meticulous research, they confront finally the question the 9/11 Commission's report blurred. Were the terrorists backed by powerful figures in another foreign nation, one the US had long viewed as a friend? On the 10th anniversary of the attacks, Epilogue will review The 11th Day by Anthony Summers and Robbyn Swan.
For millions of Americans, September the 11th, 2001 was their darkest day in living memory as the nation came under attack from hijacked commercial airplanes. Now, 10 years on, the USA government has killed the alleged mastermind of the attacks, Osama bin Laden, but the rage of the USA and its thirst for revenge unleashed war against the Taliban in Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq, and the execution of Saddam Hussein, all branded as part of the war on terror. This book questions what really happened and the possibility that the Bush administration knew about possible attacks before 9/11, yet did nothing to prevent it. The idea of an inside job remains probable amongst a substantial element of American public opinion. To talk about these 10 years, the subsequent inquiries and the longer-term consequences for relations between the West and the Muslim world, I'm joined in the Press TV studios by Noel Glynn, clerk of Quakers for Truth on Terrorism. Noel's been a peace campaigner since the mid-60s with various citizen bodies including the United Nations Association and Reinvestigate 9/11 among others. And Martin Summers, a spokesperson for Reinvestigate 9/11, who holds degrees in politics, philosophy and economics from Oxford University. Welcome to you both. So, conspiracy theory, do we really know what happened? Has this book made it any clearer for you now?
No, it hasn't, actually. No. I think it's one long attempt to reassure the public that there is no need for an independent inquiry.
So it's a bit of a whitewash, you think?
It doesn't deal with the main issues that are questionable. There are some glaring issues which are not explained and have not been explained in this book, such as, for example, the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7.
Yeah, on that point, I mean, the book...
And what do you think of it?
It claims to be the ultimate account of 9/11, which is a big claim, let's face it.
It's a big claim.
It's a big claim.
You need several books, maybe, to make that claim.
And the book doesn't fulfil it. Noel's just mentioned World Trade Center 7. There's one sentence in the book on page 75. It says, great chunks of debris had fallen on Trade Center 7, which collapsed into stones in the afternoon. And that is the only coverage of the collapse of World Trade Center 7 building in the whole book. Now, many of your viewers may or may not be aware that a third building collapsed on the day. It was in your video earlier. I saw World Trade Center 7 coming down into its own footprint. It was not hit by an aeroplane, so the explanation of a fire caused by aeroplane fuel cannot possibly explain the collapse of World Trade Center 7 in the mid-afternoon of the day. Now, this book simply elides that whole question.
So in other words, it's not what's in it,
it's what's not in it. That's
they do refer to the sort of the civil engineers. There were 3 different civil engineer organisations did their reports from a sort of technical point of view, because some people couldn't understand how a crash jet, obviously with lots of jet fuel, which is going to create a lot of heat, but not sufficient heat to cause the destruction. And yet the 3 different civil engineer groups basically said that, that was the cause. There wasn't some secret bomb.
Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, headed up by Richard Gage, Gage, who visited this country recently, he disagrees with that.
Yeah.
The third building collapsed into its own footprint without being hit by an aeroplane. Now, this book simply deals with that in one sentence. That's not adequate.
Yeah.
It's not adequate at all.
No, what do you make of that?
Well, yes, I mean, the whole point about the mysterious collapse of World Trade Center 7 is that if it had been caused by fires, and that is assuming that carbon fuel fired could melt steel, which
is disputable,
it would have toppled over. But it didn't topple over. It came straight downwards into its own
symmetrical collapses.
Own footprint is in a symmetrical collapse. I think it was in a time of 6 seconds. Now, the only way
virtually free fall speed.
Yeah, the only way that could have been achieved would have been if all the supporting columns had failed simultaneously.
In three
now, the general
buildings.
media, when gentlemen like you come out with these observations, anybody who disputes anything, doubts anything, the general media write you off as sort of conspiracy theory nutters and madmen. But when you read this book and when you read the many articles associated with it, there's some pretty serious people expressing doubts about what went on. Not sort of strange young men with lonely lives.
No,
but
well, I mean, for
serious,
example, obviously, they were on Press TV. On page 554 of the book, it says, in 2010, in what was surely a crude exercise in political mischief-making, Iran's President Ahmadinejad claimed that all 9/11 had been merely a big fabrication to justify US actions abroad. Now, it's not just President Ahmadinejad, don't forget, who is privy to all Iranian secret intelligence as president of Iran. It's also the head of the Russian armed forces on the day, General Leonid Ivashov, who was chief of staff of the Russian armed forces on the day. He is quite clearly on the record as saying, as far as I'm concerned, this was an inside job by Mossad and the CIA.
And the American senator resigned from the commission because he reckoned they weren't being allowed to get
he said it's
to
a
the root
whitewash.
of it all, wasn't it?
And don't forget, they didn't want an investigation. It was families who pushed for an investigation, and the investigation itself was a whitewash. President Cossiga of Italy also said it's well known in intelligence circles that Mossad CIA carried out 9/11, and President Cossiga, of course, was implicated in what is known as Gladio. Gladio isn't covered in this book either. Now, Gladio, anybody can look this up by doing a search on their computer. Gladio was the NATO secret stay-behind army based in Western Europe during the 1970s and 1980s, which carried out major terrorist attacks which killed civilians, including the bombing of Bologna railway station in 1980. Now, that is absolutely essential context for understanding 9/11.
Now, many of our viewers trying to get their head around this would perhaps naturally ask, what's in it for anybody to do this cover-up? I mean, why would the American administration want to bring down its own buildings, kill its own people?
Why would they want to blow Bologna railway station? I mean, the fact of the matter is the American people are decent people. They wouldn't want to go to war to steal other people's resources, so they have to be tricked into it, basically. Yeah. And this is the basic motivation.
I mean, it has enabled the Bush administration to bring in draconian laws restricting civil liberties, and also a justification for attacking other countries. And in Afghanistan, they wanted an oil pipeline which would go through Afghanistan and right down to the coast in Pakistan. And in Iraq, of course, there were large quantities of oil which the US, I dare say, or the oil industry, which may be behind this. We don't know who exactly is behind this, but the oil industry may well have wanted to get control
interestingly,
of Iraq's oil.
One of the points they make in the book, the authors, that about 30% of American public opinion, as recently as the past year, still believed there was more to this than meets the eye. And
well, it's higher, it's higher in New York
conspiracy
itself.
Theories. There's an awful lot of people.
It's higher in New York itself, which is an international city with international connections. One of the most important bits of the book, which is in the book, which I think is important, is in a note on page... Where are we? Yes, this page, 495 in a note. It says, the authors... specific episodes have been taken to suggest Israeli intelligence activity within the United States at the time. One occurred on the morning of 9/11 when a woman in a New Jersey apartment across the river from Manhattan telephoned the police. She had seen below her a group of men on the roof of a van shooting video footage of the burning Trade Center and, she thought, celebrating. Film taken from the men's camera, sources said later, did appear to show them smiling and clowning around. The onlooker who called the police reported the van's registration number, noting that it was marked Urban Moving Systems. Arrested that afternoon, the men with the van turned out to be 5 young Israelis. They were held for more than 2 months, questioned repeatedly, and eventually deported back to Israel. Now, those gentlemen are Mossad agents. It says they're Boss Dominic Suter. The two of the men, it was later reported, had been Mossad operatives. So we've got Mossad photographing the event, and these chaps went on television when they got back to Israel and said, well, all we were doing was documenting the event. But what they're documenting is a secret surprise attack, and they were in position, ready to film when the first plane hit the towers. I mean, that is suggestive, is it not?
Yeah,
of who may be really behind
clearly,
this event.
the day of the attack, all that, I think people accept, was probably not known. There's no evidence to suggest it was known by anybody. But what has not been disputed was that the CIA and the FBI were tracking some of the individuals involved. Yes. So part of the accusation of this book and part of the accusation of the senator who resigned from the commission was that the United States intelligence services knew a lot more about the individuals involved. Yes, these just weren't young Saudis out of the blue. They actually knew that these guys were up to something.
Well, exactly. And the question is, lower levels of the FBI were kept out of the loop by more senior people. Yeah. And what the suspicion has to be is that elements within the state apparatus, not the entire state apparatus, but elements within the state apparatus are basically behind this attack. And don't forget, Al-Qaeda, and this is well known, was set up in the 1980s, Operation Cyclone, to fight in Afghanistan. The lead agency for that being MI6, of course, which is why we've got many Islamic extremists based in London.
But how could they keep something like that tight? Because if this was, say, an inside job, one of the accusations many people believe, how could you keep something like that so secret? Because a lot of people would have to be involved in it.
The fact of the matter is that lots of people have come out and said what they know, but the mainstream media haven't picked up on what they've said. So Susan Lindau, who was a former CIA agent, has been saying what she's been saying. Yeah. Sybil Edmonds, who's a former FBI agent, has been saying what she's been saying. That these people have spoken out, but the mainstream media, not press TV, but we're talking about the mainstream Western media, have not picked up on this. And don't forget, it's a very hard thing for people to take on board that the state might be engaged in this sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think we'll just take a quick break to look at a passage from the book where the American president obviously is reflecting the rage of his countrymen who have not really been under attack since Pearl Harbor, and he decided to give some very special and rather strange powers to the CIA. Let's take a look at what the authors make of this.
The CIA proposed the creation of agency teams to hunt down, capture and kill terrorists around the world. It would have the authority to render those captured to the United States or to other countries for interrogation, effectively establishing a secret prison system. It would also be authorized to assassinate targeted terrorists. 2 days later, the President signed a secret memorandum of notification empowering the agency to take such measures without the prior approval of the White House or any other branch of the executive. Bush was by now referring to the coming fight as a war on terrorism. By the following week, when he addressed the joint session of Congress, it had become the war on terror, the label for the conflict that was to endure until the end of his presidency.
So now what this presidential order was effectively doing was declaring war on any state that harboured a known terrorist, essentially, wasn't it? I mean, despite the fact that the USA is a major member of the Security Council, it was saying we're not bothered about international law, we're not bothered about state sovereignty. If you've got somebody on your soil that we want to come and get, i.e. Pakistan and Osama bin Laden, we're going to come and get them. I mean, that's a pretty robust stance for a sovereign nation to take of that size.
I would say that some aspects of the military-industrial complex are probably behind this, but it is not possible for us to point a finger and say who exactly. We need more investigation.
That's right.
Now, the reason, what possible reason can there be for opposing an investigation unless you don't want the truth to come out? Yeah. It suggests, does it not, that there is criminality or wrongdoing there, that the people who oppose an investigation do not want to come out. Perhaps the people who commissioned this book. I don't know.
I mean, I don't know what you're taking, but one of the things I found scarce about it is that the reaction that Americans then had to Muslims who would wear the faith dress, to anyone who looked vaguely Arab. I mean, it's interesting that 7,000 Muslims serve in the United States forces, and yet there was this tremendous, almost like a racism blew out of this.
Well, not almost like a racism, it was racism, let's face it. And if elements within the state apparatus were responsible for this attack, then it becomes more heinous. I mean, if you think back to the bombing of Moscow in 1999, which in Litvinenko's book, Blowing Up Russia, the chap that died of polonium poisoning, he made the allegation as an ex-FSB officer that the FSB had carried out those bombings in order to implicate the Chechens, in order to get Putin elected. Now, all that's being suggested here is that the CIA is no better and no worse than the FSB. And this is the real world, and this is how sausages are made, folks. And it's about time people woke up, because we're having a banking collapse and a potential war with Iran. The Western powers keep talking about it. The Israelis keep talking about it a lot. It's time for people to face up to the fact that we may be being led astray here quite dramatically.
This book really doesn't go into that as much as it might, though, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it focuses only on 9/11, as I say, and as I mentioned Gladio earlier, I mean, Gladio was uncovered by 3 parliamentary inquiries, one in Italy, one in Switzerland, one in Belgium. It's not conspiracy theory. It's historically documented fact that CISMI and the Western Intelligence Services bombed Bologna railway station in 1980, killing 80-odd people, and nobody was ever punished for it.
But don't people, in a way, expect those who live in the murky world of CIA, MI6, and all the different intelligence, they mix in a strange culture? It's inevitably secretive. How could it be otherwise? I mean, you can almost make up any conspiracy about them because you simply don't know. You'll never really find out what they're up to.
Our position as Reinvestigate 9/11 is that we don't claim to know what happened. We are simply saying that the official story, for the various reasons we've discussed, simply can't be plausible, and that's why there must be an investigation. And if there is a thorough investigation which shows wrongdoing, then there should be punishment. We pay our military and our armed forces to do a job for us. That is to catch the perpetrators of these kinds of acts and punish them.
And who do you think should conduct this investigation? Presumably not the American...
one would ultimately look to... I mean, Sabrowski used to head up... Colonel Sabrowski used to head up the US Army War College. He's a Jewish-American officer, and he is saying, as far as I'm concerned, Mossad and the CIA carried out this attack, and he's a Jewish-American officer. And I think there are good elements within the armed forces who are aware of what's happened, and it's for those people to deal with those who are not so good. I mean, ultimately, we do rely on the people we pay to be our security services to do a job for us, and we expect them to do that job. But of course, some of the people involved may be implicated, and they have to be dealt with. We know the police have to investigate the police sometimes. The Metropolitan Police is being investigated at the moment. This struggle to kind of control the state apparatus, who will guard the guards, is eternal.
Well, I mean, what do you think the chances are of a thorough and independent investigation? Is it?
Well, we're not
going to be very old men by the time?
We're not there yet. I think we will get one in time, because eventually historians will say this just doesn't make sense. And we've got to have a thorough investigation. I don't think we're going to get it this year or next year. It'll take a bit longer. But the movement demanding an investigation is growing all the time.
Military Officers for 9/11 Truth have a very good website in which over 250 senior US military officers have called for a full investigation.
In terms of sort of the consequences of what happened, well, obviously now 10 years on, the Americans got Osama bin Laden, who at the time said wasn't he.
They did.
But subsequently, I mean, people couldn't decide whether to claim credit or not. There was a lot of confusion about that, but sort of he's dead. There's attacks even today. There's news of a new member of Al-Qaeda being arrested in Pakistan. Do you think one of the dangers for this is America still acting almost in a sort of rogue revenge state? They haven't calmed down yet as a government.
Well, I think that's right. That's definitely right. And of course, the real threat is a major Middle East war, probably involving the Iranians and the Israelis. I mean, we're on the brink of this, and you know, the noughties, if you like, have been our 1930s, and we're about to go into our 1940s. And we need to get to the bottom. I mean, the burning of the Reichstag in 1933.
Pakistan, where the ISI, you know, sometimes seemed to play both ends against them, and 1 minute there were the Taliban.
Well, General Gul, who commanded the ISI in the 1980s, is on the record as saying he believes 9/11 was an inside job. So we've got senior military officers in Pakistan, in Russia, and in the United States itself, all saying that they're not happy with this explanation. Now, are they conspiracy theorists stuck in their bedrooms with no life? No, they're senior military officers. What some people call conspiracy theory is what I call military intelligence analysis.
And these kinds of attacks are not new. They are called false flag operations, dating back to the time of piracy, when people would fly the flag of another country, but they actually wanted to attack it. And I've been looking at the earliest that I could find false flag operations going on, and it was in the 6th century BC in Greece.
Oldest trick in the book.
A man called Pisistratus had himself attacked and wounded, and his mules, the mules that drew his chariot, attacked and wounded, in order that he could get the support of the Athenian people for him being their dictator.
And the pressure in a way for investigations, a lot of it tends to be media-driven. Politicians only react if the press is hounding them in a way, doesn't it? Because they think that's reflecting public opinion. Yeah. So do you think there's the press are going to be interested, or do they think the sort of world's moved on and this is history and let's forget?
Well, I mean,
we're
all here 10 years later, which is actually an arbitrary thing, isn't it? 10 years, it's just an arbitrary time. But I mean, this has been such a seminal event in international politics that we're going to be discussing this. Yeah. You know, it's going to be in the history books, isn't it? Let's face it. And I think it's going to be in the history books as a supreme act of evil by people inside the Western power structure. Yeah. And I think that, as I mentioned Gladio earlier, people can look this up. This is historically documented. We think of the Iran-Contra affair. You said earlier, if you've got something like this going on, how do you cover it up? Well, Iran-Contra was covered up until Senator Kerry's committee exposed what was going on. Now, this is the kind of thing...
So it's the sort of the momentum for an independent inquiry. Do you see that coming from... I mean, the mainstream media just don't want to know, do they?
They don't want to know. It suggests an extraordinary amount of control within the mainstream media. I mean, who are pulling the strings there? People like Rupert Murdoch? I don't know. Yeah. But it suggests that perhaps a few millionaires feel it would not be a good idea to expose this.
Can I just say that in the world at large, there's widespread scepticism about the official story.
Yes. Sure.
So, for example, I was on a trade union delegation in Colombia 5 years ago, and we spoke to the trade union leaders and social movement leaders that we met, and we said, well, we suspect that the Americans themselves may have carried out this attack, and their answer to that was claro. Yeah. It's obvious to us because they're killing us every day.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see how much of it comes out, but I suppose in a way you need a brave politician in America to take up the cudgels, but there's no great sort of sign of anybody wanting to cause...
I would see the revolt coming from military officers rather than politicians.
You think it's going to be people leaving the service?
Well, not just leaving the service, actually fulfilling their duty to deal with their colleagues who are out of order.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I would see.
I know an RAF officer who's taken this one up.
Yeah.
Feels he's been overlooked for promotion, stopped from flying aircraft, now manages the
because he's asking difficult questions.
Well, as Reinvestigate, we do have talks with senior British military officers. I won't name them on air because these are off-record discussions, but we are talking to these people.
We'll have to leave it there because I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. This historic event has implications far wider than just the misery inflicted on the more of 3,000 innocent families who suffered after the 9/11 attacks. Security and peace have been jeopardized for a decade now, but the US government has not answered any of the several questions which have remained unexplained since 9/11. Millions of lives have been lost, not only in the USA, but in Iraq and Afghanistan as a consequence of this event. The world is still not happy with the story told so far about that day, and we can only assume that demanding a new investigation will not stop until the answers to all these so-called conspiracy theories are answered. I'd like to thank Noel and Martin for joining us, and I hope you've enjoyed the show. If you have a book you'd like the programme to review, we'd like you to keep getting in touch, and here's how.
The Epilogue team want you to continue with your book review suggestions. You can email us at epilogue@presstv.co.uk. And don't forget to join our Facebook page. Enter Epilogue on Press TV into the search bar. You can watch past episodes, leave comments and take part in discussions with other Epilogue fans.
Keep your feedback coming, and until the next Epilogue, thanks for watching.